So this is Nanooze Labs, and my name is Carl Batt. I'm the developer of this. And this is your training video, or at least some video that hopefully you'll get a little bit out of that might help you understand what Nanooze Labs is all about. So if you get a little bit lost or you want to learn a little bit more, if you go to www.nanooze.org, or if you just Google the word Nanooze, you basically come to our website. And you can find lots of different articles, and then a link to also the magazine. So Nanooze is the Nanooze Enterprise, as I now call it, was started as a website probably sometime around 2005. And then about a year later, a little bit longer, we expanded it to be a quarterly magazine, a print magazine, because I just felt like the web is a wonderful thing to reach people one-on-one, but for students in a classroom, it really wasn't exactly what I wanted it to be. So we started producing Nanooze the magazine, and you can find that in the exhibit. And then about 2 years ago, we opened up an exhibit called Take a Nanooze Break, which is located at Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida. And then last September, we opened up the exhibit that you guys are helping out with, which is called Nanooze Labs. So don't ask me why one is called Take a Nanooze Break and the other one is called Nanooze Labs. It was just sort of two groups of people sitting around talking about what we should call it, and that's what you got. So I'm the creator of it. I'm a professor at Cornell University. I run a research lab with students and postdocs and other folks like that, and we do nanotechnology research. This is kind of another little portion of my brain, and I still remain what I call the chief content developer and chief maker of training videos. Alrighty, so this is what the exhibit looks like, which you all know. It takes its name from the phonetic spelling of the phrase nano-news. So in the marketing team, that was me, sitting around, 6-7 years ago trying to decide what we should call this, I finally stumbled on the idea of calling it Nanooze. So Nanooze Labs was opened in September 23rd, 2011, basically to commemorate the International Year of Chemistry, which was 2011. So the exhibits, the magazine is all supported by the National Science Foundation, and it took them pretty much most of 2011 to award the grant, and so that's why we are still in the International Year of Chemistry as far as I'm concerned. And again, there's a sister exhibit at Disney World in Orlando, and if you go there and visit, you'll see some of the same elements there. This is the magazine. It's produced every quarter. It's distributed free to students in schools through their teachers. And if you have kids in school, or you know teachers, or all of the above, or none of the above, and you want to get Nanooze sent to your school, just go to www.nanooze.org and just click on info, and you'll get in touch with me, and I'll be happy to send copies out. Again, it's free of charge, and we're trying to encourage kids to learn about science. Okay, so what's our agenda? Our agenda for today is, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about what is a nanometer. A nanometer is a billionth of a meter. Simple as that. What is nanotechnology? What do people know about nanotechnology? And then I'm going to get into this idea of what's the smallest thing you can see, and then what's the smallest thing you can think of. And I'll get to that, and you'll understand why those are important questions. Then talk about the 4 commandments, which are basically the 4 things that, gee, that would be really nice if people knew what they were. And after visiting Nanooze Labs, maybe they'd know a little bit more. And that's all things are made of atoms. Yes, indeed, all things are made of atoms. Molecules have shape and size. At the nanometer scale, atoms are in constant motion. And that's a really tough one for people to understand. And then finally, molecules in their nanometer scale environment have unexpected properties. And then I want to talk a little bit about the exhibit itself and some of the pieces that you see there. Okay, so what is a nanometer? A nanometer, again, is 1 billionth of a meter. And it's very hard for people to understand. It's not even that easy for me to understand. You can kind of get what a billion of something is, but 1 billionth is a lot harder. Atoms are measured in nanometers. So atoms are less than a nanometer across. And so we can think about it in those terms. So this is a way to measure atoms. A bacterium is about 1,000 nanometers. And then finally, a hair is about 100,000 nanometers. And I like using a hair as a reference point because it's something you can see, And then, as I'll explain to you in a moment, it's something you can imagine how you chop it up and make a nanometer out of it. This size scale is basically a logarithmic size scale, so it goes from 100 million nanometers, which is about the size of a tennis ball. A bacteria is, again, about 1,000 nanometers. A hair is about 100,000 nanometers. And then when we talk about molecules like glucose, and then finally atoms or smaller molecules like water, we're talking in the nanometer scale. And we can make stuff, these nano devices, on the order of tens of nanometers in size. So here's the analogy we like to use. If you were to take a hair and chop it along its width 1,000 times, and you can imagine how that might happen. You can imagine how big that 1,000th of a piece might be, and you took one of those pieces and chopped it again, you get a nanometer. If you think about it the other way, if you were to take 3 atoms, they would be about a nanometer high. Now, what's truly cool is the fact that in the latest generations of computer chips, the parts in a computer chip are only about 22 nanometers in size. Now, 22 nanometers, 3 atoms per nanometer, sorry, and you can begin to imagine how small these things are. They're less than 100 atoms across, and we can produce those in large scale, pretty cheaply, and pretty reliably. Okay, so how do we see nano? And most of what is in Nanooze Labs is kind of more like seeing stuff. So with a standard microscope, you can see things that are around 1,000 nanometers, about the size of bacteria, a little bit lower, maybe down to around 700 nanometers. The most powerful microscopes in the world can see individual atoms. And that's what's shown on the right-hand side. This is IBM spelled out with 35 atoms of xenon. So each one of these individual spheres is an individual atom. Now to do that, for IBM to actually, and this is almost 20 years ago, to take 35 individual atoms and place them in the correct spots to spell out IBM required a special trick. And to see atoms, we need to cool them to absolute zero because they're always moving. And we'll get to the commandments in a while, but one of those is atoms are in constant motion. So what's nanotechnology? Well, nanotechnology is the manipulation of matter at the nanometer scale. And that's kind of it. We can move things, we can move atoms, we can construct things out of atoms and molecules that are only a few nanometers in size. So nanotechnology can make things different by taking advantages of the unique properties of matter at the nanoscale. So remember that at the nanometer scale, materials are different. And carbon is a great example. So carbon you can use to make diamonds, very hard, very brittle. You can use them to make graphite, kind of slick. You can use them to make nanotubes. And nanotubes are things that act like little wires. And then you can use them to make buckyballs, which is these molecules that are formed out of 60 carbon atoms, and they have very interesting lubrication properties. And you can also stick things inside of them. And these are just some images of what some of these molecules look like. So if you go out and you ask the general public, have you ever heard of nanotechnology? And we've done this. We've done this for literally tens of thousands of people over the last 10 years. If you ask them, have you ever heard of nanotechnology, the percent that answers no. Have you heard of nanotechnology? No. Reaches up to about 70-75% in young kids. It drops down, 18 to 22 is the lowest. So there about 70% of the people that we asked had heard of nanotechnology, and then again it rises as you get to older people. Now even with the people that know or have heard of nanotechnology, very small fraction of them really understand it to being the manipulation of matter at the atomic scale. So we approached the survey in a slightly different manner. After asking a lot of people, have you heard of nano, have you heard of nanotechnology, we produced 2 very simple questions to try to get an idea of what people knew. And you'll see in the show that these are some of the questions that we kind of go over again. And that is like, what is the smallest thing you could see with just your eyes? In other words, if you just look for the smallest thing, what would it be? And typically the answers are crumbs, a bug, piece of dust. People are very much looking around their environment because they never really think about what the smallest thing that they can see with just your eyes. Now, if you then ask them, what's the smallest thing you can think of, a lot of kids will say the same thing: a bug, a dust, a crumb. But every once in a while, you'll have people who say, oh, an atom, a molecule, a quark, a muon. You get those sort of answers. And so when you ask a few thousand people, what's the smallest thing you can see and what's the smallest thing you can think of, you discover that a lot of kids will say that the smallest thing they can see is the smallest thing that they can think of. What you'll also get is what we call the post-atomic kids. And those are kids that think of something that's smaller than what they can see. And if you look at that data, and now you plot what we call a think score, which is, it goes from 0 to 4, with 4 being those kids, when you ask them, what's the smallest thing you can think of, they say something subatomic. So basically, you have the post-atomic kids being those kids, adults, who think of something that is smaller than what they can see with their eye. And that tracks along very well with this idea that it plateaus off someplace in the teenage years, and then as you look at older people, they are no longer post-atomic. They forget that they learned in school about atoms and molecules, and they don't think about them on a constant basis. So from all of that work, we devised the 4 commandments. And these are, again, the 4 things that we'd be really happy if people understood as they go through life as, interested parties in the field of nanotechnology. So the first commandment is all things are made of atoms. The second is that molecules have size and shape. The third thing is that the nanometer scale atoms are in constant motion. And remember, you can't see them unless you cool them down to the point that they cannot move. And then finally, molecules in their nanoscale environment have unexpected properties. And that's what makes nanotechnology cool. So what's the point of the 4 commandments? Well, they were formulated so that we could help the general public understand about nanotechnology. They're also useful talking points that are incorporated into the show. And so again, it's things to keep in mind as you talk to people during the show or talk to guests after the show. The other thing I need to stress is what isn't possible with nano. And this is a really tough one because, to tell you the truth, most of the really cool stuff is stuff that will never happen. It's sort of science fiction. It's sort of a fantastic voyage. Let's shrink ourselves down to the size of a blood cell. Well, that's not going to happen. So first of all, we can't make, and probably never will be able to make, little robots that move around our blood and kill tumor cells. And this is a great picture. I really like the artistry in this picture. I really like this little machine floating around with these little articulating arms and grabbing hold of a bad blood cell and then doing something to it. And the reason is that we can't make mechanical devices at that size scale. And the reason why? Again, atoms and molecules are in constant motion. You can't build a mechanical device out of so few atoms and keep it intact. And so that's why we're never going to succeed at building these little things. But you know what? These are cool. These are nice to look at. These attract a lot of attention, and that's okay. But as long as we keep in mind that some of this stuff just is science fiction. Okay, so let's take a quick walk through the exhibit so I can give you an idea of what these different exhibits are about. The first one we'll talk about are the computer touch screens that sort of are around the outside circle. This is what we call Touch a Molecule. It's a touch screen computer, and guests get to take molecules on a spin and zoom around and see things at the atomic scale. So all the molecules in there are what we call ball and stick models. So the ball represents the atom, the stick represents the bond between the atoms. There is hemoglobin, which is important for blood. There is quartz, which is basically silicon crystals. There is a rhinovirus, which is important for the common cold. There is water, and the cool thing about the water is it's moving around, so you can see what it looks like moving around. And then finally, there's silicon. And again, there's little narratives associated with each of those. Just press on them, you can spin them around, you can zoom in and out, you can have a little bit of fun. Now, one of the other things is that some of these elements are sort of carried through in other parts of the exhibit. The one that's really fun for little kids, and I think that's obvious after you spend a little bit of time, is what we call a magnification station. These are just common magnifying glasses that magnify, up to about 5 times, and there are very common objects on the table there. We tend to use a lot of objects that are derived from nature because they're just cool to look at, and so you see a lot of butterflies, a lot of bugs, a lot of things that would be kind of neat to look at. The other thing is that we sort of continue on and carry some of these objects over. And those include the butterflies, because when you look at zoom and you look at rope scope, which we'll talk about in a moment, you'll also see butterflies there as well. Now, butterflies are kind of fun because, one, they're colorful, and some of them, like the blue morpho butterfly, and I think there's some samples on the table of that, have a blue color not because of a pigment, but because of a nanometer size structure on their wings. So they have these little nanometer structures that actually just deflect or diffract out blue light, and that's why they're blue. The second thing I wanted to talk about is zoom. So zoom is a series of regular objects that we zoom in on up to 100,000 times magnification. We almost reach the atomic scale, but not exactly, and it's just a lot of fun. You can see on the lower left-hand side of the monitors these little size bars, and kids can come by and look at butterfly wings, dragonfly wings, an oyster shell, and also a computer chip at scales up to about 100,000 times magnification. And then finally we have rope scope. Rope scope is over on the left-hand side. These are digital microscopes. They have about a 30x magnifying lens on them, and when you consider the size of the monitor, you get about a 200-fold magnification overall. They're there for people to look at objects that are placed there or to look at whatever they want to on their own body or on their friend's body. And they're just a lot of fun and a lot of good images associated with them. So that's the exhibit. Again, it was developed by myself, Carl Batt. I'm at Cornell University, professor there. You can reach me at carlbatt@gmail.com, or just Google Nanooze and click on info, and all of those emails come to me directly. The work, the exhibit, the magazines, all of this stuff is supported by the National Science Foundation, and if we can make a special point every once in a while to tell guests about who really pays for this stuff, that'd be a really great thing. So hopefully I get to meet you in person at some point, and hopefully this video has been somewhat useful for you. Thanks.